I never thought I'd be sharing my story here, but I need to get this off my chest. I'm still processing everything that happened, so bear with me. This is going to be long because there's a lot of background needed to understand the whole situation. I met my husband Robert 6 years ago at a friend's housewarming party. We clicked instantly. He was charming, funny, and seemed like a genuinely good person. We dated for 2 years before getting married, and these past 4 years of marriage had been amazing until everything fell apart last year. Robert's parents, John, 58M, and Deborah, 56F, have been married for 35 years. They have 5 children: Mark, 34M, Robert, 32M, Diana, 30F, James, 26M, and Amy, 22F. Deborah is a stay-at-home mom who dedicated her life to raising her kids, while John built a successful construction business from scratch. They seemed like the perfect family on the surface. My relationship with my in-laws was decent in the beginning. Deborah was a bit controlling with her children, especially her sons, but I tried to maintain a respectful distance and not interfere. John was always kind but somewhat distant, probably because he was always busy with work. Everything changed dramatically about 8 months ago. John had a massive heart attack while at work. It was really touch and go for a while. The doctors weren't sure he would make it through the first night. I was 4 months pregnant at the time, but being a nurse, I knew I could help. Deborah was completely overwhelmed trying to handle everything alone. Robert and his siblings all worked full-time jobs, and while they helped when they could, someone needed to be there during the day. I took a leave of absence from work and stepped in to help. I stayed with John during the days while everyone else worked, managed his medications, helped with his physical therapy exercises, and monitored his recovery. It was exhausting, especially being pregnant, but I couldn't just stand by when I had the skills to help. This went on for about 3 months until John was strong enough to manage on his own. During this time, I noticed Deborah becoming increasingly hostile toward me. At first, it was subtle, little comments about how I was trying to show off my nursing skills or how she could handle her husband's care herself. Then it escalated to remarks about how I was trying to take her place as the family caretaker. I brushed it off, assuming she was just stressed about John's condition. John, on the other hand, was incredibly grateful. We developed a close bond during his recovery. He would tell me stories about his life, and we'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. The real trouble started when I was 7 months pregnant. Robert came home one day, completely distant and cold. He wouldn't look me in the eye or talk to me. Finally, he told me his ex-girlfriend Lisa had reached out to him with some information. According to Lisa, she and Robert had slept together 8 months ago at a work conference in Chicago. I knew this was impossible. Yes, Robert had attended that conference, but Lisa wasn't even there. We later found proof that she was actually in Europe at the time. But Robert chose to believe her over me. He said the timing lined up with my pregnancy, and that's why I had been acting different lately. I was just tired from taking care of his dad. Despite my protests and pleas for him to think logically, he moved out that same night. He said he needed space to think, but he had already made up his mind. He missed all my remaining prenatal appointments. He wasn't there when I went into labor 5 weeks ago. He refused to sign our daughter Emma's birth certificate. Deborah, instead of being the supportive mother-in-law, added fuel to the fire. She told everyone in the family that she had always known I wasn't trustworthy. She claimed I had trapped Robert into marriage and now I was trying to trap him with another man's baby. The only person who stood by me was John. He had seen my character during his recovery and refused to believe I could do something like this. Last week, John came to meet Emma for the first time. He had been trying to convince Robert to at least get a paternity test before throwing away our marriage. Robert finally agreed and came with him. I was nervous but relieved. Finally, a chance to prove my innocence. But before we could even discuss the logistics of the test, Deborah, who had invited herself along, started making nasty comments. She said Emma looked nothing like Robert, that she could see the other man's features in my daughter's face. She went on about how she had raised 5 children and knew what babies were supposed to look like at this age. That's when Robert snapped, but not in the way anyone expected. He turned to his mother and said something that changed everything. If anyone should be worried about paternity tests, it's Dad. He should test all 5 of us kids considering what you did with Uncle Mike back in '95. The room went dead silent. Deborah's face turned white as a sheet. John looked like he had been punched in the gut. Apparently, when Robert was around 9 years old, he had witnessed something between Deborah and his father's brother Mike. He had kept the secret all these years, not sure if he had understood what he saw correctly. Now everything has exploded. Deborah is denying everything, saying Robert is making things up to deflect from his own situation. John is devastated and questioning his entire marriage. Robert still hasn't agreed to the paternity test for Emma, seemingly more focused on his family's drama than his own daughter. I'm exhausted. I'm trying to care for a newborn while dealing with all this family drama. Part of me feels vindicated that Deborah's true colors are finally showing, but another part feels terrible for John. He doesn't deserve this after everything he's been through this year. I don't know what's going to happen next. Robert's revelation has opened a Pandora's box that can't be closed. I just want what's best for my daughter, but right now, everything is chaos. Update 1: These past 2 weeks have been absolute chaos. After Robert dropped that bombshell about Deborah and Uncle Mike, our entire world turned upside down. I need to share what's happened because it's honestly too much to process alone. John didn't waste any time after Robert's revelation. The very next day, he contacted a private laboratory that specializes in paternity testing. Deborah threw an absolute fit when he told her all 5 kids needed to be tested. She locked herself in their bedroom for hours, screaming about how he was disrespecting their 35-year marriage and how could he doubt her after she gave up her career to raise his children. The whole situation became even more dramatic when she called all the kids for an emergency family meeting. Everyone except Robert and Amy showed up, Robert because he's still dealing with his own guilt about accusing me, and Amy because she had a feeling what this meeting was really about. Deborah tried to paint herself as the victim, crying about how I had somehow manipulated Robert into making up lies about her. She claimed that I had turned her family against her because I was jealous of her perfect marriage. But her performance backfired spectacularly. Mark, who had always been closest to her, asked her point-blank why she was so afraid of a simple DNA test if she had nothing to hide. That's when she snapped and started revealing things nobody expected. She admitted to having a moment of weakness with Uncle Mike but swore it was just once. She tried to justify it by saying John was always working, she was lonely, and Mike had been there for her. The DNA results came back yesterday, and they were devastating. 2 of the 5 kids, Mark and Amy, are not John's biological children. Deborah's one moment of weakness story completely fell apart. Mark, the oldest at 34, was apparently the result of an affair with her college boyfriend that continued into her early marriage. And Amy, as Robert had witnessed, was indeed Uncle Mike's daughter. The most ironic part of this whole mess? Robert, who was so quick to believe his ex's lies about me cheating, is actually John's biological child. When he found out, something in him broke. He showed up at my house at midnight, sobbing uncontrollably. He kept apologizing for not trusting me, saying that watching his family fall apart made him realize how easily he could have destroyed our family over unfounded suspicions. But I'm not ready to forgive him yet. You don't just get to abandon your pregnant wife, miss your child's birth, refuse to sign the birth certificate, and then expect everything to be okay, just because you're sorry. He let his mother spread vicious lies about me throughout the family. He chose to believe his ex-girlfriend over his wife without any proof. That kind of betrayal leaves deep scars. Deborah has been making everything worse with her constant calls and messages. She's been on a rampage, calling everyone who will listen to tell her side of the story. According to her twisted logic, this is all my fault. She claims that if I hadn't seduced John during his recovery with my nursing act, none of this would have come out. She's convinced herself that I somehow manipulated Robert into revealing her secret just to get revenge on her for supporting his doubts about Emma. John moved out of their house 3 days ago and is staying with his sister. He says he can't even look at Deborah without feeling sick. Mark hasn't spoken to Deborah since the results came back. He's struggling with his entire identity being shaken. Amy is in therapy, trying to process that the man she knew as Uncle Mike is actually her biological father. The other siblings are caught in an impossible position. Diana and James, who are John's biological children, are trying to support both parents while dealing with their own feelings of betrayal. They're angry at their mother but also worried about how this will affect their family long term. Robert keeps trying to see Emma, but I'm not comfortable with unsupervised visits yet. He missed the first 2 months of her life because he chose to believe lies over trust. Meanwhile, John has been an amazing grandfather to Emma. He visits regularly, brings supplies, and actually helps with a baby instead of just making accusations. It's ironic that my father-in-law has been more supportive than my own husband. Yesterday, things hit a new low. Deborah showed up at my house unannounced, clearly drunk. She started screaming in my front yard about how I had destroyed her family. She said her affairs were in the past and I had no right to make Robert reveal them. When I reminded her that she was the one who started all this by supporting Robert's unfounded accusations against me, she tried to slap me. Thankfully, my neighbor heard the commotion and called the police. I filed for a restraining order against Deborah. Robert is furious with his mother for trying to attack me, but I reminded him that he's not in any position to defend me now, not after abandoning us for months. He agreed and said he'll respect whatever boundaries I set. He's starting therapy next week to work on his trust issues. John called this morning to check on Emma and me. He apologized again for his wife's behavior and for not seeing her true nature sooner. He's filing for divorce after 35 years of marriage. I feel terrible for him, but as he says, he'd rather know the truth late than never know it all. I have a meeting with my lawyer next week to discuss custody arrangements for Emma. As much as part of me wants to punish Robert for abandoning us, I know that's not what's best for our daughter. I just need to figure out how to co-parent with someone I'm not sure I can ever trust again. Update 2. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, life proved me wrong. The past 2 months have brought revelations that make everything that happened before seem almost tame in comparison. We finally discovered why Robert was so quick to believe Lisa's lies about me cheating, and the truth is more twisted than anyone could have imagined. It turns out Deborah had been secretly meeting with Lisa for months before she made those accusations about sleeping with Robert. This discovery happened purely by accident. Mark was helping John sort through some paperwork at their house when he found Deborah's old iPad. She had forgotten to sign out of her messages, and what Mark found was shocking: months of conversations between Deborah and Lisa, planning how to break up my marriage. The messages showed Deborah actively encouraging Lisa to lie about sleeping with Robert. She had coached Lisa on exactly what to say, when to contact Robert, and even suggested the specific work conference to mention because she knew Robert had attended it alone. Deborah had promised Lisa that once I was out of the picture, she would help Lisa get back together with Robert. She even offered to help Lisa financially if needed. But that wasn't even the worst part. The messages revealed that this wasn't the first time Deborah had done something like this. She had successfully broken up 2 of Mark's serious relationships using the same playbook. She would find willing ex-girlfriends, promise them her support in getting back with her sons, and then help them create drama. She kept a detailed record of these manipulations in her messages, almost like she was proud of them. Her justification in the messages was chilling. She wrote to Lisa about how she was protecting her sons from women who weren't good enough for them. She claimed that as a mother, she knew best who her sons should be with. In my case, she wrote that I was too independent and would never be a proper wife because I had my own career and didn't rely on Robert enough. When Robert saw the messages, he was physically sick. Everything suddenly made sense: why his mother had been so supportive of his doubts, why she had encouraged him to move out, why she kept insisting that something wasn't right about my pregnancy. She had orchestrated the whole thing from the beginning. Robert tried to confront Deborah about the messages, but she refused to admit anything. Instead, she accused Mark of fabricating the messages to hurt her. When that didn't work, she tried to justify her actions by saying she was just looking out for her children's best interests. No one's buying her excuses anymore. The divorce proceedings between John and Deborah have gotten ugly. She's demanding half of everything, including his construction business, claiming she sacrificed her career to raise their children. But John's lawyer thinks the evidence of her affairs, combined with proof of how she deliberately sabotaged her children's relationships, might help reduce what she gets in the settlement. Uncle Mike finally broke his silence too. After weeks of avoiding everyone's calls, he came clean about everything. He admitted to having a 3-year affair with Deborah in the mid-90s, which resulted in Amy's birth. But he claimed he hadn't known about any of her other affairs. His wife left him as soon as the truth came out, and most of the extended family has cut ties with both him and Deborah. Robert has been trying to make amends. He's been consistent with his therapy appointments, respecting my boundaries, and being an attentive father during his supervised visits with Emma. He's horrified at how easily he fell for his mother's manipulation, but that doesn't change the fact that he chose to believe the worst about me instead of trusting his wife. John has become an unexpected source of support through all this. He understands better than anyone how it feels to have your trust completely shattered by someone you loved and trusted. He's encouraged me to take my time deciding about Robert, saying that trust, once broken, needs more than just apologies to be rebuilt. The rest of the family is still processing everything. Diana and James are barely speaking to Deborah, focusing instead on supporting their father through the divorce. Mark is in therapy, working through the revelation that 2 of his serious relationships were deliberately sabotaged by his own mother. Amy is still struggling with everything but has found some peace in knowing the truth about her biological father. As for me, I'm taking things one day at a time. The betrayal wasn't just from Robert, it was from Deborah too, someone who should have welcomed me into the family but instead plotted to destroy my marriage. The truth is out now, but that doesn't make the hurt any less real. Update 3. It's been 6 months since this nightmare began, and while some things have settled, others have changed completely. The biggest news is that John and Deborah's divorce was finalized last week. Deborah tried to fight for half of everything, but the evidence of her affairs and the proof of how she manipulated her children's relationships worked against her. She got to keep the house but received much less alimony than she wanted. She's been playing the victim card hard, telling anyone who'll listen that she's been abandoned by her family after one mistake, conveniently forgetting about the multiple affairs and years of manipulation. The most significant change is that Robert accepted a job offer in another city, 4 hours away. He says he needs a fresh start away from all the family drama, but I think he's running from his guilt. He still sees Emma every other weekend and pays child support regularly. Our relationship is strictly about co-parenting now. We communicate through a co-parenting app, and it works better this way. I think we're both finally accepting that some broken things can't be fixed. Mark decided to do some ancestry DNA testing and managed to find his biological father, Deborah's college boyfriend. Turns out he's a professor in Boston now, married with 3 kids of his own. He had no idea he had a son and was actually open to getting to know Mark. They've met a few times, and while it's not a father-son relationship, they're building some kind of connection. Amy, on the other hand, wants nothing to do with Uncle Mike. She says John is her real father, regardless of biology. John feels the same way. He's been extra supportive of Amy through all this, proving that being a father is about more than DNA. Uncle Mike and his wife are getting divorced, and he moved to Florida to start fresh. Good riddance. The family dynamics have shifted dramatically. John spends a lot of time with Emma and me. He comes over for dinner 3 times a week and has become the grandfather my daughter deserves. He's actually started dating again, nothing serious yet, but it's good to see him happy. Deborah tried to turn the other relatives against him for moving on too fast, but after everything that came out about her, no one takes her side anymore. Last week, Deborah sent me a lengthy email that showed she still hasn't accepted any responsibility. She blamed me for destroying her family, saying if I hadn't ingratiated myself with John during his recovery, he would have never grown close enough to me to believe me over her. She said I owed it to her to convince Robert to move back home and that I should tell John to give their marriage another chance. I didn't bother responding. Her manipulation doesn't work anymore now that everyone sees her for who she really is. I've started dating again too. Nothing serious yet, but it feels good to know that Robert's betrayal and Deborah's schemes haven't ruined my ability to trust. Ironically, it was John who set me up with one of his golf buddies' sons. We've been on a few dates, and while I'm not ready for anything serious, it's nice to feel like I can move forward. Emma is growing fast and, funny enough, looks more like Robert every day. It's ironic considering all the drama about her paternity. The test was finally done when she was 3 months old, proving what I knew all along: she's definitely Robert's daughter. But by then, the damage to our marriage was irreparable. Sometimes I wonder if things would have been different if Deborah hadn't interfered, if Robert had trusted me, or if I had been able to forgive him. But then I look at how peaceful my life is now without all the drama and manipulation, and I know I'm better off. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the best family isn't the one you marry into, but the one you choose to keep in your life.